Thank you, everybody, for being on time. If not a little early, we will, whoops, off and on. We shall get started in just half a second here. A couple of little admin details, trying to get some of our panelists added to. Thank you, everybody, for being on time. If not a little early, we'll, whoops, off and on. We shall get started in just half a second here. A couple of little. Hey, Bob.
Hey, sir. How are you?
Good. We are.
Master Smith is trying to join us, and I believe Master Moody is as well.
Trying being the operative word there, I take it.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I have yet to see him pop into the wrong room to be promoted, as is our usual. But let's get started here, and we will roll right along and add participants and panelists as we go, as per normal. But our topic today is on expanding your expectations and ultimately what the steps are to create a $1 million plus school. And Bob, as you know, over on our on my YouTube channel, which I can post the direct link to that here in the chat box as we go, so people know. There's Jeff Smith, promoting him to panelist as we speak. But over on our YouTube channel, what we have done is post several excerpts of our regular. We do 2 meetings a week with our members, our lower level and new people. We do a Thursday quick start meeting, and on Tuesday, the more advanced and the higher level schools, we do a meeting. And I posted excerpts from a couple of those meetings just recently. And the excerpt that I'm referring to specifically is what are the steps to the top 1%. Here I can share and show everybody here, as long as I don't get a feedback loop, since we're also live on the YouTube here. So here we go. But the ones I'm talking about are, we posted this, what are the steps to the top 1%? And then a school owner's journey from 25,000 a month to, I think it says 85, which is about where he was last month. What is $1 million martial arts school? And those three are a behind the scenes conversation with a bunch of schools that are now clearly in the $1 million plus category. And for anybody on the meeting, whether you're watching live, which will be any more fairly small percentage of people who registered, to be fair, and or watching the recording, which will be several hundred people, is I highly recommend, at the very least, anytime you doubt anything that I say, that Jeff Smith here says or Bob Dunne says during this meeting, go over and watch straight from the horse's mouth from our clients. And these are not people who started out that way, although we certainly, one of our newest clients is already over 3 million with the rationale of working with us, of accelerating their growth and becoming more profitable, and all the usual things. But these are people who started out at 15,000 a month, sometimes 10,000 a month, other times 20, 25, 30,000 a month. But we do get quite a few people coming in who are already at 60, 65,000 a month, trying to figure out how we've got schools doing 120,000 a month with 60, 70 net, because that blows their mind as well.
Can you promote Greg Moody to panelist, Master Oliver?
Sure. Matt Smith, are you traveling today, or are you just in a different room? Traveling?
Tampa.
Off to work with Stephen D. Castillo.
Correct.
There you go. Well, I guess we should introduce everybody. I'm sure your screen layout may look different than mine, but with the dead deer on the wall and the diving symbol of Florida on the wall. And Bob, I'm sure you bought that because every time I talk to you about a hunting story, it involves drinking beer and oiling your gun, never firing it in anything resembling anger. But
or texting martial arts school owners in a stand.
That's right. That's right. That's right. That's right. But Bob has been working very effectively on a professional level with martial arts schools for, I think, 17 years now, Bob. Maybe it's longer than that. I know you and I have been personally working together for 15 years. To the point of I acquired the company with 17 people, and you and Merrick were keepers. There were, to be fair, there were a few others that were productive and valuable as well. Just didn't, for whatever reason, didn't fit with them or with our future needs. And then we have, and Andy's an avid scuba diver and pretends to hunt while he takes an excuse to go drink in the woods. And
he's an official fisherman. You can say that.
Yeah, that's right. Kind of.
I think the word is hunter and scuba diver, but
that's right.
That's fine.
I do a lot of fishing as well.
Okay, you do a lot of fishing as well. There you go. I stand corrected. And then we have Greg Moody, and Greg, you are one of the senior masters in the ATA organization. You've been running multiple schools now for, God, how many years? At least. Go ahead.
That's close to 30 now, sir.
Yeah. At one time across state lines as well in California and in Arizona. And so you've been at this a long time. Plus you have the two of us are the academic nerds, but you have the combination I love to make fun of. You're a rocket scientist and a psychologist and with a lot of formal education and education, which I see. And Greg, you will probably agree with this. I won't speak for you. But I see an awful lot of people teaching martial arts teachers how to teach and teaching martial arts teachers about bullying and so forth who has absolutely no clue what they're talking about. As you know, that was my field of study informally back in 83, 84, 85, 86 is one of my first black belt was director of humanities for the biggest school system in the state and had a master's in education administration and a PhD in psycholinguistics. We ran me through all of the educational psychology stuff and had him go through our curriculum. And it brought me to the conclusion that most people teaching martial arts teachers how to teach have no clue how to teach in such a way that the student is receptive, as is true of the bullying, the exact wrong frame of reference on the bullying thing. So anything to add about your background before we move on?
Well, yeah, that was all my doctoral work was on bullying prevention, and I've done the certified to teach in schools, and so yeah, that's a good way to say it. I mean, I think people think that common sense they use what they think is common sense, but really that just means they made some stuff up. Yeah. And so there's a lot of rampant misinformation on how to teach, what to teach, and what they think they're doing is correct. So, we get asked so much, I think, about how to grow your school, and we have the answers for that, how to get more students, how to increase your income and those answers. But there's a lot to it to do that properly, and including these other pieces about teaching well and having good student service is also part of it. And that's something we're very mindful of.
Yeah. And then we get to the two old people in the room here. Jeff Smith, I guess I could go first. I've been running schools since 1974, although in retrospect, what I considered running a school in 1974 is considerably different than what I would take seriously today. That was the Tulsa YMCA, where the first Nautilus equipment was built, as a trivia point for us all. But I worked my way through Georgetown, working directly under you at the Ginnery Institute, which at the time was, to my knowledge anyway, the most financially viable, successful, substantial martial arts organization in the world, certainly in North America. So you and Junri and Nick Okinis and so forth. But and then I came to Denver and opened 5 schools in 18 months, 6 schools in 30 months. ended up at about 3,500 active students by the time I was 25, 26 years old. And then, had the misfortune, I'll say at this point, of running one of the biggest national tournaments for 10 years, the Mile High Karate Classic, which was a NASCA World Tour event. And again, I think they all do a great job, and, God bless the promoters, because, the competitors all think the promoters are getting rich, and the promoters are all suffering through their better opportunities elsewhere, and suffering through it because they love the art, love the sport, and or just got sucked into it. I used to quote what's the mafia, the Godfather movies. I keep trying to get out, and they keep sucking me back in. That tends to be that one. And Master Smith, you have been a world-renowned competitor and martial artist since I can't count how late 60s, early 70s, but you started. I started martial arts training in 1969. You were what 1963, if I remember correctly.
Pretty close, 64.
64. Okay. So 1964, but you started teaching martial arts in Texas first in a college program, and frankly ran it given the age in very similar ways that we would talk about now. I mean, you had some some interesting business innovations even back running a college program there, but then you moved to Washington D.C. to help June Rhee resurrect really his organization, and then that organization, as head instructor, vice president, general manager, various titles over the years, built it up to 13 locations, a multi-million-dollar organization in 1970 dollars, much less in our current dollars. And along the way, happened to end up the number one point fighter in the world, through a lot of work, and then training 35 hours, 40 hours a week professionally, became the first world light heavyweight kickboxing champion. In fact, heavyweight kickboxing, the only world heavyweight kickboxing champion under Don King's organization, as he tried to enter kickboxing, among other things. More important to this conversation is you've been professionally running schools through June Rhee, through world champion Jeff Smith karate, through Mile High Karate, and now as well through martial arts wealth mastery. As long as I can remember, but when did you move to Washington D.C. and work with June?
1970, so almost 55 years.
Yeah, and like I said, what you were doing in Texas really was innovative relative to what most people were doing. Of course, a lot of the business ideas of martial arts did spring back with Pat Burleson and Alan Steen and those guys in Texas, where you were birthed out of, but then really the birth spring of the high level professional operations were you working with June Rhee there in Washington D.C. in conjunction with Ned Muffley, who came from Arthur Murray and Art Linkletter Dance Studios. But hey, we've got a pretty good quorum of attendees now, and let's really get into the meat of our meeting here. What I was saying earlier is our topic is expand your expectations, and what the multi-million-dollar schools, what the million-dollar schools are doing. And let me clarify terms. When we're talking about a $1 million martial arts school, we're not talking about a daycare. So we're not, if they do that, and most of our clients are not in that realm, but if they do that, that's a separate number that we're looking at. What we're talking about is they're doing $1 million, $1.2 million, $1.5 million, $1.7 million or more in a single location, running a traditional martial arts school where students on average come twice a week. And then if they're doing big summer camps, if they're doing transport after school care, et cetera, that's a completely different thing. And again, what I was finding, by the way, and you guys can agree or disagree with me, what I was finding is most of the schools who went into the daycare side of it, transport after school, summer camps and so forth, didn't go into it because they loved the idea of running a daycare. They went into it because they couldn't figure out how to make a significant income running a martial arts school. And so we've had an awful lot of people who are doing both, who shut down the daycare because they don't need it, because they're making a lot more money running a martial arts school than running the daycare. So, but again, nothing wrong with that business. The largest client that we've had was running 4 locations, about 168 it varied, but 150 to 180 students at each location, with an average revenue of about $600 a month, running after school care programs. And that obviously was very successful, and it was profitable on a percentage basis. The traditional martial arts schools tend to run a much higher percentage to the bottom line than the transport after school care. But as a foundational piece, that's what we're talking about. Now,
and to be clear, that wasn't our largest client. That was one of the largest daycare, and martial arts schools in the country.
Yeah, and the numbers I was given was just the daycare component.
Yeah.
But that's right. But it's not like we haven't worked with an awful lot of those programs very successfully. What I'm saying, though, is not to confuse the two. So if we're talking today about Sebastian, who did, I think, 85,000 last month, if we're talking about Sebastian, he's running a martial arts school program. He's not doing a daycare transport after school program. Tim Harrison, Matt Smith, I'm not sure. I know his numbers from last month.
126 March.
So 126,000 purely from martial arts. And let's talk a little bit more about what that might look like. Typically is typically what that'll be is Sebastian at 85,000, I know, is about 275, a little more, but 275 active students. Active meaning they're coming to class every week, but 275 active students and 85,000 a month. So you can divide 275 by 85 to get the average revenue per student. Our target at the low end is 300 students at 300 average month per revenue equals 90,000 a month. Our target for our higher end schools is moving to 400 and 500 average revenue per month. So 300 students at 400 is 120,000 a month. 400 students at 400 is 160,000 a month. And as you grow your school, there is a break point where if I had a choice of let's say 600 students doing a given level of revenue, let's say 100,000 a month. If I had a choice between 600 students doing 100,000 or 300 students doing 100,000, any day of the week, I'll take the 300 students. And the reason for that is it really does take a more sophisticated operation, because there's a magic number around 300. Some would argue 275, some might argue 325, but a point at which the staff have a hard time remembering names, keeping track of people, a point at which the dropout rate escalates. Now, you can certainly overcome that, and we've overcome that many times, and structured systems to keep track of that. But it is a more sophisticated operation, both in terms of square footage, staffing, and operation systems. And frankly, most schools, as they break in those big numbers, that's why I've seen any number of people running around, and they're nice people. I don't mean to criticize them personally, but in what I consider the bozo explosion, running around with, they have 1,000 students, but their net profit isn't very much, because their structural operation is not at all what we would recommend in order to make it profitable. Matt Smith, what would you add to that?
Well, when you were talking numbers, what we try to simplify a school that is what we're shooting for all our members to be is $1 million school. And we found that it's been a lot easier for our members to get to that point, so much that now we've gone beyond that, and now we're shooting for 125,000. Now we're doing 150,000. So it keeps going up as our members keep fine tuning what we're doing, and the fine tuning is that 300 students like Sebastian, where you said he had 275 students. Well, his student value there was about 310. So he has, on the average, about students in his school are spending about $310 a month per student. And that's how he's able to do 85. But when that number are schools that start going over the 300 number, they're at 345 or 350. And now their student value is going up to 350, because your student value should be a combination of your lowest price program and then your highest price program. Mm-hmm. And then if we add those two together, then that's the student value you should have if you just renew or upgrade, whatever term people use, half of your students. So if half are paying, let's just say for round numbers, $350 on a black belt and $250 on a basic, well, that's going to give you a 300 student value if you just renew half the students. Well, we have schools that are charging more than $250 on a basic now, and some that are charging more than $350 on a black belt or leadership program now. So those numbers go even higher.
Yeah.
And people have, with our retention systems, because the reason most people have trouble making $1 million is because, one, they don't get their price point right, and two, they get on a hamster wheel. They have as many people coming in as going out, so they don't know how to control their dropouts to get them down to 1 or 2%.
Yeah.
And that does take some moving parts, and it does take some training. But we have members that are down in that 1% or 2% range, where now they're getting net enrollment every month of 10 to 15 students a month, net enrollment. Because if you have 300 members and you're losing 2% of them, then you're only losing 6 people a month. Well, if you get 20 enrollments, well, that's a net enrollment of 14. So you see, a school can grow every year by 100 to 150 to 200 students if they learn to control their retention.
Right. To use, many people have used it, but Nick's old analogy of the leaky bucket. You're trying to fill a bucket with water, let's say, and a bunch of holes in the bucket, so it's going out faster than you can to fill it. And go ahead.
Well, I was going to say when we talk to a lot of people, and I think people listening, a lot of people think their retention is fine, but when we talk to you and we run the numbers, we find out that it's not. That's the scariest part. And for a lot of people listening, or whether live or on the recording, you might think your retention is really good. You think, well, I don't have a lot of students quitting, because you're perceiving the ones that tell you they're quitting, or you perceive the ones that want to stop for the summer, which our guys don't have trouble with this.
Yeah.
But almost everybody, if you don't know your exact percentage, you do have trouble with retention.
Yeah. The Peter Drucker's old line is, what gets measured gets done. And again, a lot of schools don't have very good measurement systems for things like this. And and Bob, you can correct me if I misstate this, because you talk to way more schools on a daily, weekly basis than I do at this point. But it seems like the common misconception when you talk to somebody, correct me if I'm wrong, is they think if I could just get more new students, everything else is fine. My students, they'll say, my students love me. I don't have a problem with people dropping out. And then when you look at the numbers, they're losing 7, 8. The worst I ever had was somebody said that to me, and they were losing 33% a month. So they were turning over the entire school every 3 months. They were an MMA school. That's typically the cardio kickboxing guys that are that bad. But they say, my students love me. I don't have a problem with dropout. My classes are great. My curriculum is great. Really, if I just had more new people coming in, I'd be fine. And most typically, I've had exactly one person I've talked to ever. I can tell you who it is Buzz Durkin, who was right. They just don't lose people. But other than that, they're almost always wrong in the fact of they don't have good measurement systems. They're subjective because they're the instructor and they don't want to judge themselves too harshly. The second thing is, and we've already talked about this taboo, but we kind of have a taboo among ourselves, is not to talk much about pricing until somebody has become a member, because what everybody will say is, I've already charged. You don't understand. I'm already charging as much as I can charge in my area, and doesn't matter where they're at. I've had school owners who were in Malibu, California, and in the financial district in Manhattan say, "Oh, you don't understand my area. My customers, my students are too smart to pay that much for martial arts lessons." And we've had school owners in Dodge City, Kansas, and in Mankato, Minnesota, who truly do have a low median or per capita income, who said, "Oh, nobody would ever pay that in my area." And my favorite is he enjoys me telling the story at this point. So I'll say I'm not speaking behind his back, because I told the story to his face any number of times. But it's my friend Ernie Reyes Sr. and his partner Tony Thompson. Years ago, I used to go to San Jose, and or they would do events for their school owners and staff in Squaw Valley, and I'd go work on their business systems with them in both of those locations. And I remember we were in somewhere in San Jose area, Silicon Valley, at this little breakfast place, and they had a room in the back, and they set it up as a U shape, and they would have their business meetings there. And I'm looking at, and they had stats. They were good at doing that, but they had the stats up. And I turned to either Tony or Ernie. I think it was Tony, and I said, "Why is it that you guys are in Silicon Valley and you're charging half of what I'm charging in Denver, Colorado?" And the answer was, "Oh, you don't understand. The cost of living is so high here. That's all they can pay." And I had to have the, I have the Master Moody, like you have the handicap of an engineering degree. I have the handicap of a degree in economics. And I said, well, it's supply and demand. Prices are a direct function of demand. The fact is, there's too much money chasing too few goods, and there's too much money because these guys are making a ton of money, for sitting in a cubicle 12 hours a day programming or whatever it is they're doing. You're at the hub of the greatest wealth creation in the history of the world, and you're charging half of what I'm charging in suburban Denver. But that was, you can come up with an excuse for any of this stuff. The other thing, as far as expectations, is and Master, we heard this yesterday. We both almost laughed out loud. Well, it's who you know, and I've just figured out that the people who succeed in my business, it's who they know. And I had to have the conversation of, well, you already know plenty of people. You've had 600 students. Many of them were in positions that would be very helpful for you. You probably don't even know what they do or did. And of those 600 people, they all have 10 or 15 acquaintances. So as you extrapolate it out, you probably already know the human resource director is the largest employer in your area, either first level or second level acquaintance. You probably already have many, many, many important people in the local elementary schools, middle schools, high schools, et cetera. It just, it just kind of never dawned on him, thinking that he had to have been like born in the right family and gone to the right frat or something like that to be successful. Strange perspective. Master Smith, what are some of the other, or throw it back at Bob, what are some of the other excuses?
No, actually, I had a couple of things I wanted to clarify when you were talking there. And one of the things that we don't do is we don't tell our members what to charge. We recommend a certain pricing, but we do have our members that some members are charging more than others, and some of them aren't charging as much. And what ends up happening is they both become $1 million schools. The only difference is that those that are charging less have to do it by getting more members. And what we're trying to do is find the sweet spot, and kind of where we found the sweet spot was that $300, and 300 students paying $300 gives you a $90,000 a month school, and you only need 84 to be $1 million a month school. So realize that it's not just raising your prices, it's adding value to the program, because when you get somebody and they just sign up for a year, well, you're never going to be $1 million school if you're not getting your students to buy in emotionally. If they do not set their goal for black belt and commit to black belt training and stay with you 4 or 6 years, which most schools, it's 4 to 6 for a first or a second degree, then you're not going to be able to get there. So don't think it's just price. And if you want to know where, I can tell any school exactly how many students they're going to need to become $1 million school. Just take your lowest price and your highest price, add those together, divide it by 2, and then renew half of your people. And that's going to tell you exactly, then do your formula, divide it out, and it'll tell you exactly how many students you have to get it.
Yeah,
Right.
and I was going to identify on that too. It's a lot of the school owners that I chat with, I don't care what they charge. Their enrollment conversions are still going to flunk because they don't have a good pre-frame and intro process. So that's a key component out of a lot that I speak with on how they actually work that front end sales process.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I might say it even slightly different, Bob, is if I'm a small school and I've never had more than an average of a few intros in a week, as soon as we get to work on their marketing, and our clients call it drinking from a fire hose, as soon as we get to work on their marketing, if you quadruple or more the number of people coming in the door, systems that were working just fine with a trickle don't work with a flood, right? This is that painting in the background is that's not the Parthenon, that's the facade of Wall Street. Most people probably recognize with Thomas Jefferson looking over it. But I don't think they've torn his statue down yet. That one, they took him out of City Hall, but not out in front of Wall Street, to the best of my knowledge. But it's symbolic of our marketing approach, which is build a Parthenon. In other words, build a bunch of pillars of feeders for ways to get to new students. And again, the other thing, Bob, that I tend to think that school owners believe coming in is that they believe they're limited by their geographic location, their square footage, their style. They just believe that there's other limitations. And what we know in all businesses and all niches, we've worked across several other niches over the years, but in all niches, what people tend to do is look around at what everybody else in their immediate environment is doing, and then they tend to imitate what they're doing. And almost all businesses, that's a bad idea. Earl Nightingale's quote was, if you don't have a proven success system, look at what everyone else is doing and do the opposite. And luckily, we have a proven success system, but you can't go wrong by basically looking at what 10 schools in your immediate area are doing and not doing what they're doing in almost all cases. But go ahead.
No, I think that just to reiterate and anchor that in, the good example of that is when we talk about pricing is we get told, I charge them what everybody else is charging, and that's really irrelevant. And that's hard to anchor in. I understand that psychologically hard to anchor in, but the way that you feel comfortable about that is we'll help you get the flood of leads in. And that's the thing that I think all of our clients, when they start working with us, they get comfortable because they get comfortable with all the other stuff we're talking about, because we help them get that flood of leads in and get enough marketing going and get the marketing that's effective. And they keep hearing in the industry about this one or two things that they should do. They do Facebook ads, it floods their whatever, and none of that works. They need to get a solid marketing plan. And really, I may sound biased, but we're really the only ones that even speak that language or help them with this kind of thing the right way.
Yeah, and to be fair, each of those pillars work to some level, right? I can create an effective Facebook marketing campaign and get it to work. I can create I don't want to use the word viral, but I can create other social media type of posts and so forth and get that to work in some ways. I can get really good at buying clicks and search engine optimizations and get that to work. But the fallacy is a martial arts school thinking, if I just had more students, everything else will be fixed. Let me hire this Facebook guy and everything is solved. That never works. And by the way, when they do that, and I can tell you behind the scenes with almost everybody who does the other side, does the agency work, is their biggest problem is always their client. So at whatever point they hand the lead off to their client is the point at which it falls apart. So it's making sure all those systems are in place to convert them as well. You were still going to say, Master Smith?
Yes, sir. What a lot of schools don't understand is that there's not the one magic pill. Everybody's looking for that magic pill. Well, what's the one thing that I'm not doing that's going to help me become $1 million school? And we found that it's not any one thing. It's no different than being a great fighter. It's not just because you have good punches or you just have good kicks. You got to have defense, endurance. I mean, there's so many factors that go in making a great fighter. Well, it's the same thing with making a great school. To be $1 million school, yes, you've got to get your leads, and those leads have to come from multi sources. You have to have internal marketing, external, and internet marketing. And we teach all those systems. But even if you have those systems, if you don't know how to convert those to appointments, and then you don't know how to convert the appointments to the intros, and then you don't know how to convert the intros to the enrollments, and then the enrollments to the renewals, and then get the retention down, get your price point set. I mean, there's a lot of moving parts. So when I say we teach everything from A to Z, there's no problem or question you have that we haven't between the 150 years of martial arts training between just you, me, and Master Moody. We can answer any of those questions and show them what they're doing wrong. You know, you have to have good statistics so you can analyze where the holes in your bucket are. So don't think it's one magic pill. Even though you get your leads, you got to turn those into appointments and intros and enrollments. And then if I just get enrollments and I don't renew them and keep them longer, well, then I'm constantly replacing all my students every year because they're all dropping out. So you get on that hamster wheel.
That's exactly right. Well, and to be more specific, when we work with a new school coming in, and it almost doesn't matter where they start, although there is some pretty good variability. We've brought in several schools recently who are really doing a good job on bringing in new intros and new enrollments, and we're doing a really bad job at everything else, right? So they were flooded on the front end. More typical is the opposite, is they think that all they need is more new students, and in reality, they do need more new students, but they need all the other pieces fixed as well. But where we always start is we start with program structure and then fixing the first contact through enrollment process, and really looking at the numbers. What gets measured gets done. Looking at how many opt-ins did I have on my website? How many unique visitors did I have? How many opt-ins did that convert to? How many of those made an appointment? How many of those showed up? How many of those enrolled? How many of those are still there in 90 days? How many of those renewed to the next level, and so forth? And really paying attention to those numbers across the board. And then once we make sure that's in place and we look at their program structure, make sure that's solid, then we open the floodgates on enrollments. And what we have determined very clearly is there's a spectrum of schools that we work with. Some are at the very lowest level where they barely have enough cash flow to keep the doors open. So we can go to work on flooding them with new students with things that may be labor intensive, but they're not going to go spend, $5,000 in advertising in some source. And then as you grow, if you're netting $50,000 a month, you'd rather trade some money for time rather than time for money. And so then we keep expanding that Parthenon towards more and more direct mail, online paid media, et cetera, so that they grow in that direction as well. Ultimately, what we want to do is we want to have maybe 20 things going on every month that's generating traffic. Some of them that cost a little bit of money, that don't take time. Some of them take a little bit of time, don't cost much money, and across a spectrum of those things. And but those are where we start with new clients, is their program structure, fixing their ratios at each step, and really knowing the numbers, paying attention, then opening the floodgates for traffic in such a way that it fits within what their budget constraints are and what their opportunities are. Then what we find is once those three things are fixed, now there's other issues that we have to work on. We have to work on long-term student retention, and we've already talked about that. And our target on that is to get below 2% a month, preferably even below 1% a month, but 1 to 2% a month dropout, which means if I had 300 active, I only need 6 new students or maybe even 3 new students a month to stay even. And that's a much easier way to operate. And frankly, it's a much more ethical way to make sure your students are really getting the benefits that you promised. And then we work on staff development to really make sure that you're not having to do 100% of the work yourself all the time, but you have real solid teachers, real solid people who are helping with marketing and sales and so forth, and teaching school owners how to delegate, not abdicate. In other words, how to bring people in and develop staff, but train them on systems, supervise, follow the numbers, know that they're doing it the way that you want them to do it. And then, as you mentioned before, Master Smith, is we really work on making sure that students, which is tied intricately, let's try to say that right, but it's tied directly to student retention, intimately to student retention, because if somebody comes in and they have, a goal of they're going to train next month because they trained last month, the retention tends not to be very high. But if they've really set a goal to be a black belt, to have a high level of mastery, to follow through at a high level, then that leads them to be much more focused on follow through and training. So we teach the school owners how to really create goal setting and a long-term expectation for follow-up. And then ultimately we wrap it all into creating the highest level physical skill set, which frankly to me means you kept them 4, 5, 6 years and you learned how to be a really good teacher, and creating an incredibly high level and sophisticated leadership development program so that you're creating new staff as you go all the time and feeding new staff members up. But also you're creating the valedictorians of your high school. You're creating people who are being successful in all walks of life. And certainly, Master Smith, as you did the Junior Institute so many years ago, creating world champions, creating the top level of physical performance. I mean, we were creating hundreds of black belts that were sharp, and creating forms champions, fighting champions, the whole gamut, right? So and Bob, the mythology, I think, is by focusing on the business, you're becoming a McDojo, to use today's terminology. Master Smith, back when I lived in Washington with Junior Institute, they called us a belt factory. I always thought that was funny. It's like, okay, let me get this straight. We have about half of the world rated kickboxers. We have 2 of the 3 world forms champions in the stable. We have some of the top black belts in the world, and we're a belt factory. How exactly does that work? Belt factory has become McDojo. And anybody who's ever been out for our black belt retreats or seen our training process, we do the opposite of water it down. What we do is we crank up the level of expectations. But the important part is, doesn't matter what your expectations are if your average student's dropping out when they're a gold belt. Most students create most of their students where they're always going to be bad at martial arts because they don't last more than 3, 4, 5, 6 months. But if your students are lasting 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, you can create some phenomenal, if you're a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu school, you can create phenomenal purple belts, blue belts, and ultimately brown and black belts. If you're a Taekwondo school, you create a ton of phenomenal first-degree black belts and second-degree black belts, and ultimately third-degree black belts. And Master Moody, ATA has done a great job of this. You have, tests where there's just a huge number of 5th, 6th, 7th, even 7th, 8th degree black belts. We have at each of our promotions people who are promoting to 5th degree or 6th degree or 7th degree black belt, tons of 3rd, 4th, 5th degree black belts. That retention creates quality students by having them there long term. Bob, what would you add to this?
Well, one of the other things I was just in the back of my mind too, when I'm talking to a lot of the other school owners out there, one of the other challenges are a lot of the loans that they took out during the COVID period, right? So one of the major benefits I think that our group has been able to, also with the marketing and growing the business and growing the revenue stream, is to help them get over that instead of being bogged down in all of these, draining aspects of the school, helping them with the retention, helping them boost the revenue. Like I keep thinking of our brand new member that's out in California. Remember, he couldn't get over a certain number his entire life and was struggling, was on the verge of actually closing the doors.
You're talking about Ben.
He's doing numbers that he never ever dreamed that he could possibly do. So if anything, I mean, I don't know if that expands upon what you were saying, but I really urge anybody. I know I spoke with a few of you guys that are on the attendee list, but give us a call. We'd love to chat with you. My number's right below, 720-256-0208.
And if you give Bob a call, he'll go through a little evaluation and do a one-on-one with you and really talk about your situation and how we can help you. But one of the things that's to me, Master Oliver, most phenomenal of everything we do is that we have all styles that are $1 million schools. It doesn't
Right.
matter whether it's Taekwondo, Kung Fu, Muay Thai, BJJ, Shotokan, Kempo, every Japanese, Korean, Chinese system there is, including the Muay Thai
Brazilian,
and BJJ, MMA, they all, because it's not their martial arts that's keeping them from being $1 million school, it's the business system. And then on top of that, it's how we train them to be $1 million school. You know, a lot of people have the misconception that they can go to a seminar a couple times a year and learn how to be $1 million school, that they can get a box of material in the mail each month and be $1 million school. Well, we cracked the code. We figured out how to make these guys $1 million school, and it was right in front of us. I'm shocked that it took us so long to figure it out, because all we have to do is train our members to be $1 million school the same way we train our students to be a black belt. You got to go to class on a weekly basis, and that's how we have our Zoom meetings and train them. And they have to have a system of checks and balances. They have to have a group of peers, just like in their school. Most of our schools nowadays are not one-room schoolhouses. They have a beginner group, they have an intermediate group or an advanced group. And that's how we train our members. We have a beginner group and a more advanced group. So you're in with your level and you graduate into the next level as you learn these basic systems to a more advanced system. Because you can't take a white belt and teach him everything to be a black belt in 1 year and expect him to be a black belt. You know, we have schools that are becoming $1 million schools because our training has gotten so good that even in 2 and 3 years, they're able to be $1 million schools. And in the first year, we see schools that are doubling, tripling, and quadrupling their grosses in the first year because of our training system that we have.
Yeah.
And some of these school owners are, you know, have been doing this 30 or 40 years and keep doing the same thing, expecting different results. And that's, you know, complete stupidity, as we know. And so
I think that was Einstein's
found the
definition of
opportunity.
insanity. Yeah.
Say that again.
Albert Einstein's definition of insanity was doing the same thing over and over, expecting different results. Yeah. Here's who, Bob, here's who you were talking about, is one of our newer members, Ben Brown. And he's,
there you go. Yeah.
he's north of San Francisco, up in Sonoma. And he's predominantly a Muay Thai school. And he had gone from 16,000 a month. He corrected me and said it's 52,000. I said 51 because that's what he wrote. But he said he did 52,000 in 4.5 months working with us. And again, he's predominantly.
That's not 52,000 in 4.5 months. That's 52,000 a month that he did in 1 month after working for us in 4.5 months, to be clear.
That's right. Yeah, he did 52,000 gross for the month of March.
Right.
So moving back 4 months, March, April, May, June. I think he started right after Thanksgiving, if I remember correctly. So he's grown from about 16,000 in November, if I've got my months exactly right, to 52,000 last month, and he's on track, I think, to beat that this month. So that's who you were referring to a minute ago.
Yes.
Bob
And I mean, the benefit of our new members that come in right now is that you're surrounded with the best of the best in the industry, right? You know, what is it? All rising tides raise all ships. I mean, look how many we have now on track. You know, we say $1 million school, $1 million a year school, but gosh, how many do we have now that they're like, yeah, that was last year.
Yeah.
You know, look, we've got, you know, many working on 2 million this coming year. So, and I mean, being surrounded with those type of school owners, those professional school owners, works cohesively, you know, with even the new ones.
Yeah, and the training is when you have other schools that are doing it, all you have to do is duplicate what they're doing. And that's what makes it so simple. You don't have to be the one that has to make it, you know, create that system. It's already there. People are already doing it. All you have to do is just keep following it and duplicating it. And, you know, Master Oliver, it's the same way that we developed all those national and world champions when we were at June Ray. Once I became world champion or national champion, and then I started getting our other instructors to do nothing differently than what I was doing. And then they started teaching their other students to do that. You know, Pat Worley was a national champion, and then he took Gordon Franks to become a world champion, because all Gordon did was just train the same way that Pat Worley was.
Mhm.
So that's why we have that winning system. And all you have to do is learn from your peers in our group. And that's how we get so many being successful so quickly.
Well, that was the story that Pat Worley enjoyed. I should go look for those films. You know, our June Re group was in Tulsa, as you know, and we had gone to Alan Steen's tournament when I was, I think, 15 years old, 14 years old, may have been even younger than that. And I had ended up following Pat around with an old Super 8 film camera, and that's the year he won Alan Steen's tournament, which was one of the biggest tournaments ever, you know, in the U.S. It was the equivalent then of what the U.S. Open has become now. But he ended up beating Ray McCallum pretty soundly, for the Grand Championship. But I just set up a mirror or I had mirrors set up, but I set up a film projector in my garage with a heavy bag and all the different training gear. And I just mimicked Pat Worley over and over and over for about 2 hours a day.
And we put our training method in Taekwondo Times. They did a whole article on our training routine, what I did and what he did, and a lot of people just copied that routine and got very successful with it.
Yeah. But anyway, just a couple things to wrap up with. The first way to achieve big results, and Bob, you just quoted John F. Kennedy, "The rising tide lifts all boats." But one of my favorites is still Bruce Lee. Before I studied martial arts, a punch was just a punch, and a kick was just a kick. After I had studied martial arts for a while, a punch was more than a punch, and a kick was more than a kick. And after I mastered martial arts, a punch was just a punch, and a kick was just a kick. The cultivation is simplicity. So it's the daily decrease, not the daily increase. And what I really find is what we are really good at with schools is not showing them a 52-point to-do list, everything they have to change, but it's creating that simplicity where they can, as Tim Harrison did recently, get on the motorcycle and ride Route 66 or go to Bike Week in Florida or go to Sturgis or whatever, or as Jan has done is, vacation
Greece, Italy,
and everywhere,
for the whole summer.
Yeah, everywhere else. Amanda just spent quite a bit of time in Guatemala with her new husband, whose family is from Guatemala. We create an operation that's...
And the schools never dipped, just to point out.
No.
That's an important part. So they took all that time off, and the schools, because the systems were in place, never dropped.
Yeah, the systems and people, right?
Correct.
And so they developed the culture within the school. They developed the people working effectively. They developed the systems. Some of them automated, some of them replicated through people, but all of those systems, and we'll show you how to automate without overcomplicating and without getting bogged down in that. We'll show you how to market online. I mean, heck, I was the first person to study this. I mean, Matt Smith, you remember, and Bob, you remember the first book I did in 1999 on internet marketing, but we stayed leading edge on all of that since. Greg, you've done deep dives into Google and search engine optimization and website development. Now I'm certainly on deep dives in all the social media as well as the online, but the search. But we stay way ahead of the curve on everything. But we're also good at keeping our clients from chasing the next bright shiny object if it doesn't do something productive for growing and developing your school. And we'll show you how to create a more simple operation with much bigger results. And the mission to me is you want to have as little brain damage as possible, and you want to make as much money as possible by creating the highest quality students as possible. And to me, we keep focusing our school owners back to that. You want to have as little brain damage as possible. In other words, you want to have a simple to operate operation where you're not having to work 100 hours a week. You want to have a high net and create wealth from that high net. That's what we're focusing on as well. Our top guys is, we brought in a wealth manager and helping them create wealth from income, not just income. But we also want to create the highest quality students. And part of retention is creating high quality students, but more importantly, really developing a rock solid reputation. So in my case, 40 years later, Master Smith, 50 years later, Master Moody, 30 years later, everybody in the area thinks more and more and more highly of you. You have a better reputation. You have a much more credibility within, not just within the martial arts industry. I don't find that particularly important, but within your community. So the churches, the Boy Scouts, the Girl Scouts, the schools, the high schools, the colleges, the residents in your area, the former students, people who trained with you for a while and moved on to something else, all speak very highly of you and have the highest praise and expectation. Anyway, hey, we're going to have to wrap up. What I would note is, for many years now, we have really been focusing just on the highest level of schools and pushing them up to the highest levels. We are going to be starting to create programs that are going to work with schools below 10,000 a month to show them how to get up to the 20s and 30s to help us. But regardless of where you're at right now, but especially if you're in the 25, 30, 40 $1,000 range or more, give Bob a call. I see several people on the meeting. You have a few who are already who are here with us live are already clients, and others who already have time scheduled with Mr. Dunne or Master Smith. But schedule a time. We're happy to answer any and all questions. I'm not a fan of the chat function, so I tend not to use it very much on these live meetings, in part because I have a hard time talking and reading the questions at the same time, to be fair. But I did post that direct link to the YouTube channel. If you're not subscribed to that, go do that. It's at Stephen Oliver MA. And then I did post Bob's phone number, which is over here where his name should be, for you to give him a call. And we'd love to talk to you. No obligation, no cost. We guarantee we'll give you 3 or 4 ideas that you can go implement right away. And do that without preconceptions. It's not that we're going to strong arm you into a price point that you don't want to do. It's not that we're going to try to change your curriculum or water down what you're teaching. None of those things is what's going to happen. What is going to happen is we're going to show you how to get more people in the front door, how to keep them longer, and ultimately how to implement systems that'll make your life easier and more lucrative at the same time, create a better lifestyle for your students. On that note, that's all I had. Anybody have anything else to add before we call it a day?
No, just make sure you take the time to give Bob a call and spend a little time with us, because we're going to make sure we give you some things that you can make actionable right away.
Exactly. Well, thank you, everybody, and we'll go from there.